Hi, welcome to Harlem Stories, a podcast about Upper Manhattan. It's architecture, it's people, it's stories, the homes, and obviously any topic that is of interest for these Upper Manhattan neighborhoods. My name is Adam Feinberg, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today. We have a great episode on tax abatements and how I only pay $4 a month in property taxes. That's right, you've heard me correctly. I pay less than $4 a month in property taxes, and it's possible you could too, at least for a little while. So in the 1970s, the city was in the middle of an economic crisis, and it sparked the famous headline, "Ford to City Drop Dead." This ultimately led to some creative solutions all around the entire city, and among these creative solutions was the 421A tax abatement. Originally, there were no provisions for affordable housing in this abatement, and later there were multiple forms of the 421A tax abatement that a developer could apply for depending on what was being built. But today we're going to focus on the condo co-op version, which is what most of our buyers and sellers are going to be focusing on. So, for the most part, we're going to be talking about the 421A, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the other tax abatements that are potentially out there. The 421A tax abatement, it was the city's offering to developers to build in areas that needed assistance and revitalization for ground-up new construction buildings. The added benefit, that this incentive was ultimately passed on to buyers within the building that had applied for the program. It was incredibly popular until it was abused, of course, like can't have nice things, right? So, when the press found out that one of the top players in the New York Yankees was saving massive amounts of money as a result of the 421A program in a neighborhood that really didn't need revitalization, there was a lot of political pressure to end the program. And while ultimately the program was largely shut down, if a developer had applied for it and they already broke ground on a property, they could still qualify for the program. And most importantly, anyone within an abated building was effectively grandfathered in the program. So even though that they ended it for new buildings entering at the same time, if you're in a 421A tax abated building, you get to keep it until it ends. So what are the benefits to buyers? The program was a large reduction in property taxes for a set period. In Manhattan, south of 96th Street, the 421A abatement was likely for 7 or 10 years and 15 years in some rare instances. Now, these have pretty much, I think they're entirely gone. If they're not entirely gone, it's probably just a few buildings that remain. But my suspicion is it's entirely gone. And if they do still have it, they're moving toward the conclusion. So for more northern Manhattan and the other boroughs, 15, 20, and 25-year abatements are far more common. And there still may be some time left before the period rolls off. And I'll explain that going forward. Regardless of how long the abatement is for, the final 5 years of the abatement is a gradual and equal phase-in, 20% per year, to what the full property tax would be without the abatement. So for a 7-year abatement, years 3 through 7, the taxes will adjust gradually each year until year 8, which would be the full unabated taxes. In a 25-year abatement, years 21 through 25, the taxes will adjust gradually until year 26, when the full amount of the taxes are in effect. So how much of the taxes we get this question all the time. How much will the taxes be once that abatement ends? And this is, I hear this from every buyer over here, and they tend to ask, but nobody can actually answer that because we don't know what tax policy will be next year, let alone once the abatement expires. So instead, I substitute that question and I make sure that I clarify over here. A more accurate question to ask will be, what would the taxes be today if there were no tax abatement? This amount can be found on the quarterly tax bills. So to understand how the tax savings can be substantial, the new building is taxed at the same level as the unimproved property, which is really amazing. So as an example, and I think it's easiest to understand this, with a real example over here. So my building, it was being used as a vacant lot for as an illegal parking lot for many years. But when the developer filed for the 421A abatement, the taxes were set at the level of a vacant lot rather than the tax base for a brand new market rate condo. So if I were to modify the situation slightly for simplicity, let's just say that this is a new 10 apartment building. And each of the apartments is signed 10% of the building allocation. Again, we just want to use nice, even numbers, for this. So 10% for each apartment. It rarely works out that nicely or evenly, but for this example, we're going to do that. This percentage of ownership impacts the monthly common charges, it impacts the taxes, and also impacts special assessments. And like I said, it's rarely as simple as just every apartment having the same percentage, within the building, but this is just for illustration. So the vacant lot was being charged $100 a month in property taxes. In this example, each apartment has a 10% of the total tax liability, so each apartment would be responsible for $10 a month in property taxes. Now, going back to the real example, my apartment has 12, my building has 12 apartments, and the unapproved lot was being charged $44 a month, with my apartment having an 8.33% ownership, meaning my tax bill is approximately $3.58 a month. It's hard to believe, but within a few pennies, this is my actual tax bill. So, so that's what it kind of worked out to, is 8.33% of the $44 that the vacant lot would have been charged. So there's a couple of years left on my first 20 years. So I have nearly 2 years left at the insanely low rate remaining. If I wanted to sell, last year would have been the optimal time to sell, because my property taxes will start to shoot up in a couple of years, and gradually I would have been paying gradually till what I would have been paying if I didn't have this massive tax bill. So if my unabated tax amount would otherwise be $1,000 a month, the first year of my taxes would rise about, and this is as we go toward the conclusion of it, the first year of my taxes would rise about $200. The second year would be an additional $200, and by year 6, it'd be the full $1,000 tax bill. All this assumes no major changes in the tax structure, so the reality could be quite a bit different. It could be a higher or lower when the abatement begins to roll off in 2 years. So, that covers the basics of the 421A. So there are plenty of buildings remaining in Upper Manhattan that still have their tax abatement for quite a number of years remaining. Some are more generous than others, and it just depends on the filing and some of the details and the timing of when these were filed. So there's all these different variables that take into account, but yeah, it is possible to find tax abated buildings with apartments that are certainly under $10 a month for now. And mine is a perfect example of that. So, what other tax abatements are there? There's others out there. J51 is the next most common over there. So while the 421A focused on ground-up new construction, the J51 abatement focused on improvements to existing buildings. This program was originally implemented in 1955 as a way to encourage building owners to install hot water plumbing in their properties. So, yeah, a lot has changed from 1955, but since expanded greatly to major capital improvement projects. Most of the J51 abatements available today are north of 110th Street, though you might occasionally find it scattered throughout the city. The benefits aren't as simple as the 421A program, though. Buildings that receive that J51 abatement receive either mostly affordable housing, a 34-year, 30 years in full abatement mode, and 4 years for the phase-out. Or it could be mostly market rate housing with a 14-year abatement and 10 years in full and 4-year phase-out. So I know of a building right now that has a J51. They have $0 in property taxes a month. But at some point coming up, because they are coming up on that 10-year marker now of when the building has been sold, and so they're going to start having a tax liability for the first time. So So regardless of whether it's either of those, the affordable or the market rate over here, the component that's true for both cases, there's a reduction of the real estate taxes by about 8.33% or 12.5% of the construction cost every year for the next 20 years. So you get an additional component of benefit there. So the J51 tax abatement in most cases, it's not a huge savings, but I have seen a few instances where the building was a shell and the J51 created a situation where that zero tax bill to apartment owners for a decade. These aren't common, but I know of some right off the bat. So the J51, it's no longer being offered. I know there's been chatter about it, but for now, just know that if a building has it, it could be beneficial to buyers in buildings that have it. So next up, what we're talking about, and this is a really important component of tax abatement conversation here, is the 485X, which is brand new. It's still being defined out there, so I'm sure we'll probably have more conversations about it later, but it doesn't sound like it might impact Manhattan at all. But if it does, it's most likely going to be in Upper Manhattan. So it's still being defined, but as we record this episode, it's being considered as like a 421A abatement. Since there was so much pushback, we know this abatement is mostly being targeted at the rental market, and it remains to be seen whether it makes its way into the condo co-op market. If it does make its way into condo co-op market, it's likely, as I mentioned, limited to the boroughs, maybe neighborhoods like East Harlem or Inwood that could still benefit from large-scale investment. But what we do know for certain, this will likely focus on having affordable units as a large part of receiving this abatement. So it really kind of gives you a great opportunity to really move forward on some of these aspects. But I think it's a great opportunity. It's allowed me to save tremendous amounts of money. And, even though my tax abatement starts rolling off in a few years, I'll still be saving a lot of money for those first few years too. It's really, year 4 and 5, where of the roll-off period where, I start having really hefty tax bills. But, I would have had that anyway had I not had an abatement. So all for the tax abatement. Hear, hear. Cheers. But all right, terrific. Thank you so much for joining me with another episode of Harlem Stories. Have a great day.